Hello everyone, I'm here today to do my wrap-up for July, and I have read a lot of books in July. I think a lot of them are also audiobooks because the first half of the month I was super busy work-wise, so I just listened to a lot of audiobooks in that time. So I think it's a good place to start with those. So the first one I read was Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden-Keefe, and this is a book about the Sackler family, which is in the US the family that is behind the Oxycontin, which is that drug that is supposed to be a pain relief, but it's addictive and it has caused addiction and death to a lot of people in the US. And so it shows how the whole idea and the whole starting of marketing of that drug happened, and also like the family at the moment, how they are acting when all these accusations of the addiction side of things are occurring. And it follows the two generations, so the one that started it and the current one. And the one that started, they were very ambitious and they were a lot more cautious than the current generation, and even though they were the ones that started everything, they did not necessarily have all the data, and even though we are not sure if they would have done anything if they had the data, they were a little bit more of a gray characters, and then the new generation, they're just most of them are basically horrible people, but I like to see that evolution, and Patrick Radden-Keefe is really good storyteller. I was not particularly interested in this particular topic, but I had read Say Nothing by him before, and I really enjoyed that one, and that one was on a topic that I was more interested about. It was about the troubles in Ireland, and this one, I read it basically because everyone said that it was good, and I trusted Patrick Radden-Keefe, and I'm glad I did. I appreciated the book and what it was doing and all the things I learned about how this happened, and also sort of like the capitalist mindset in general of how big companies that do immoral things work. So I am glad that I read it, and I'm glad that I learned about those things. And yeah, as I said, I felt like it has a bigger scope than just looking at this family. But if you read it with sharp mind, you can also relate that to other companies. It's more of a portrait of how companies that do immoral things, like this company selling this drug, but also maybe oil companies and other type of things make their money, and what they're thinking behind all of this is, and how they justify to themselves what they're doing. So I found that really interesting, and I will want to read anything that Patrick Radden-Keefe writes, because he's very good at telling a story. And then I read two books for the Orwell Prize in the non-fiction category. The first one was Do Not Distorts by MIchela Wrong, and I had also read another book by MIchela Wrong before. She's a British correspondent in Africa, so the one I read before was about Kenya and the corruption that happens and the tribalism that happens when during elections and things like that. So yeah, that one was very interesting to me, because obviously I'm invested in Kenyan politics more than any other thing. Do Not Disturb is about Rwanda, and the Rwanda after the genocide. So the current president, Kagame, I tend to have the idea before that he was a very forward-looking person. He had a lot of policies to empower women and to fight climate change, to ban one single-use plastics, and all those kind of things that sound really good. But yeah, this book talked about that and how he was using that to look good in Western countries, but at the same time he was kind of terrorizing his own people. And yeah, it brought a new light to this very complex and very interesting person that is Paul Kagame. Yeah, so I'm really glad I read this one. I still think that he's doing good things for whatever reason, if it's to please the West, or it's just because he genuinely thinks they are good ideas. But in terms of environmental stuff, he's still doing a lot of good things. But yeah, like that doesn't justify the things that he's doing to his own people and the way that everyone is terrorized in that country. So yeah, that's that. That's what I got from that book. And then another one that I read for the Orwell Prize is The Fourth Time We Drown by Sally Hayden. And this one is actually the one that won the non-fiction category, and I'm super glad it did, because this was amazing. So this one deals with the limbo that is when African migrants try to come to Europe. Many of them go to the North African coast and take a boat to the other side. And what the European Union did was to give a lot of money to Libya to take those vessels in the middle of the Mediterranean, take them back to Libya and put all these people in refugee camps, or not refugee camps exactly, detention centers they call them, but actually they sound a lot more like concentration camps. The conditions are horrible, and the author is a journalist as well, and her contacts got forwarded to some people that were in this detention center. So these people were sending her messages like, please help us, this is happening here, please help us, they are starving us, there's a war going outside and we're stuck here and we don't know what to do, things like that, and how the UN programs and the European programs help absolutely nothing and are actually the cause of these people being there. And it's just horrible what's happening. And I knew that the European Union were giving money to other countries around the European Union to keep the migrants there instead of letting them go in. But the way that, like, seeing the details and everything is just horrible. And there is, as I said, I read the audiobook, and in the audiobook there are snippets where you actually hear the voice messages that these people gave to the author, and how desperate they are in their voice. It's horrible, the things that they have to go through when they are basically running away from death in their own countries. It's not that they want to leave their countries. I mean, we always think of people that migrate to the West as people that want to take our things because we are a better country, but actually, like, these people really do want to stay in there. Many of them would want to stay in their countries if it was safe and it was possible for them to do that and live a decent life. The reason they come here is because they're desperate, not because they want to come here because our food is better and our weather is better or anything like that. That's not the case. So yeah, I mean, it's just horrible, and I think this is a very important book, and I'm really glad it won the Orwell Prize. I think the last one that I read in audio was The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, by Honoree Fanonne Jeffers, and this is a huge book that follows a family in the West, a black but very light-skinned family in the West, and it goes back and forth between the past and the present, and in the present there is this girl from the family that is studying a certain plantation in the south where her family was, and she is trying to see how things came to be and how the slaves were treated. But I think this book does a very good job actually of concentrated in the place between slavery and present time, so the time of like this segregated school and segregated everything. I haven't read a lot of books about that part, and I really enjoyed to read about that aspect of it. Also, there was in the past timeline where obviously the black relatives of this family were slaves, and there was also the white people, which were the slave owners, but there was also the Native Americans. Part of this family's heritage is Native American, and we see, especially I was very interested to see how the Native Americans interacted with the black people in the plantations, because we know how the white people treated the Native Americans, but we never hear about the interactions between Native Americans and blacks. So that was another single point of this book that I enjoyed, and there were a lot of little things like that, and the story itself, like I am a sucker for multi-generational stories, but also the characters were alive and were engaging, so there were a lot of elements in it that I found refreshing for this kind of story. I mean, I have read so many black slaves in the South are treated really badly. That kind of story I have read many times, but this had enough new elements to justify existing and justify its length and making it engaging. I mean, part of it might be that I read it in audio, and it was really well done. The audio was amazing, but I found it really good example of that genre, and adding a lot of new elements to it. And then onto the physical ebooks kind of thing that I read. I read a lot of books for the Orwell Prize again, but mostly in the fiction category. The only one that I read for the non-fiction category that was not in audio was The Right to Sex by Ama Srinivasan. And this one I was a bit disappointed about, because I think it was because of my expectations in part, but this was a very academic book. It was not written in a way that was easily accessible to everybody, and also it was a lot more centered in men than I thought it was gonna be. I mean, it makes sense. A lot of these things that we complain about, of rapes and things, the men are the perpetrators, so it makes sense that there is a big element of men that needs to be explored. I just didn't expect it. So yeah, it talks about rape and consent, and what exactly consent is, and how the definitions that we have at the moment are insufficient. It also talks about porn and what porn teach, especially young boys, how sex is and how unrealistic that is in terms of body shapes, in terms of the sex itself. So it does a lot of exploration of those topics. As I said, again, from like the women's point of view, but like talking about two men. It talks about two men a lot, this book, and how the expectations are unrealistic. So yeah, I didn't feel like this was very targeted to me personally, and I also didn't feel like this met my expectations. But that doesn't mean it's a bad book, it's just not what I wanted to read from this. So yeah, that's that. And then the other ones that I read for the Orwell Prize are Appliance by J.O. Morgan, Cwen by Alice Albinia, Sterling Karat Gold by Isabel Waidner, There Are More Things by Yara Rodrigues Fowler, and The High House by Jessie Greengrass. And I have a video for the Orwell Prize where I talk more about all those books, so I'm going to link down below that video. But just to wrap up a bit that, my favorite was There Are More Things by Yara Rodrigues Fowler, which again was not what I was expecting it to be. For some reason, because of the cover and the title, I expected a book that was about consumerism and capitalism, and all of those elements were there. It was more the story of these two girls in London. One of them was Brazilian and the other one had Brazilian heritage, and it was kind of connecting throughout their Brazilian history together. And also it explored other things like environmentalism and activism. There was a lot of activism in this. There were brushes of LGBTQ plus issues thrown in there, but at the core of it, it was just about two girls in their 20s that became roommates in London, and just that friendship that develops with someone that is your roommate and you have common things with, and just exploring those common things. And I really enjoyed it. I think it's maybe not, it had a lot of experimental-ish writing in it, but it didn't feel like overly literary. I think it's a very accessible book, and it's warm, if that makes sense. It has a warm feeling throughout, that even though bad things happen here and there, it's just kind of life and the small moments in life. At least for me, that's what I got from it. So yeah, that one was my favorite from the ones I read. It's not the one that won, but it was the one I enjoyed the most. Then I read Under a White Sky by Elizabeth Kolbert, and this one was also a little bit of a disappointment. So I read The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Kolbert before, and I really enjoyed this one. Under a White Sky is a little bit different. It focuses on kind of the future and how we could try to deal with climate change in very proactive ways, let's say. There is geoengineering, there is agricultural tricks that could happen, but overall what summarized the book for me, it was this line that was in the book that said, "This has been a book about people trying to solve problems created by people trying to solve problems." And for me, that's basically what it is. They're trying to solve these problems that we created, but in my opinion, the solutions that are proposing mostly are going to create more problems again, like the people that try to solve the other problems. So I'm not a huge fan of this kind of really proactive ways to go about things, because I think we don't know the whole scope of problems that will create, and they will create more problems than they solve, in my opinion. I am much more for other methods, like reducing our impacts to a place where they just don't cause as much problems. But yeah, I understand that's a little bit slower than maybe we will like, or I don't know if we have time for, but yeah, it's like what they are proposing are basically band-aids that might really hurt when we rip them off, let's say. So yeah, I was a little bit on the fence about this, because I just don't think that what the book explores is such a positive thing. But yeah. And then I read Nights of Plague by Orhan Pamuk, which is an arc that I received from NetGalley. Thank you to NetGalley. And I do have a full review of this, so I will link it down below as well. But yeah, this one was about an island in the Ottoman Empire in the 1901, where there was a plague outbreak, and kind of the dynamics of that happening, which were interesting. I think having gone through a pandemic ourselves, it gives a whole new light on how plagues and pandemics have been treated in the past, and how little we have changed, and how sad that is. But actually this book, I think it was written before the pandemic, so that adds an extra layer of, wow, this guy really knew about what he was writing. However, I have to say that the way that the story is told was not my favorite part of it. So the main character of this book is the island itself. We do have some characters here and there, but they are not super well developed. And The narrator is a historian in the present day that has connections to some of the people in the island, some of the characters that we follow, and I thought that was a kind of a weird choice. So the way the story is built and the way that the narrative and the storytelling goes, it was not my favorite, but I think the story itself, it's interesting. So yeah, again, a middle of the road thing for me. And then the rest of the books I have read are normally very short, and they are mostly for my Read Around the World project, and some of them are for the month of August, the Caribbean part that I haven't talked about yet, and some of them are for later on, because I'm trying to catch up with the areas that I have not read so much about. So the first one that I read was The Moon is Following Me by Cecil Browne, which are short stories, which is normally not my thing, but this one actually had some kind of humor that was not so bad. But I will talk more about this one in my Caribbean video that will be coming up soon. Then the next one I read was Folk Tales of the Maldives by Xavier Romero-Frias. Unfortunately, this is not written by a Maldivian author. It's a Spanish man, Spanish historian academic that lived in the Maldives for many years and collected the local stories. So it's kind of like he wrote them down, but he just went there and those stories were told to him. So he archived them basically. So that in that sense, you could discuss about who the author of these stories is. But yeah, overall, I mean, they do give a sense of the culture and the day-to-day life of the Maldives, but they were really short and there were a lot of stories. Some of them were like 1 or 2 pages long, and it also had illustrations, so some of them were like 1 page plus an illustration. So yeah, for me it was just they were not long enough to have any depth on them, in my opinion, most of them. So yeah, although I thought it was okay, it's just not my style of writing. Then I read Love Songs Make You Cry by Lasana Sekou, and this one they are again short stories, but I enjoyed a lot more because these short stories were like 20-30 pages long, and they had a lot of cultural elements in them. And the tone of the stories was very conversational, so it felt like a friend was telling you a story, and in that sense it makes sense that they're short stories. Like if you meet your friend for coffee, they might tell you 2-3 short pieces of their lives, like stories or about people that they know, and it just felt like that. It just felt like a friend was telling me something that happened to them while we're having a coffee, and that worked for me a lot more. And it also does have a lot of representation of the culture that it's talking about. This book was about St. Martin, and I felt at the end that I understood St. Martin better than I knew before. Then I read White Egrets by Derek Walcott, which is a poetry collection. And although the author is Caribbean and there is Caribbean elements in the poems, the poems mostly focus on him traveling within Europe and the different countries that he visits in Europe, and he compares what it's there with what it's in the Caribbean and reflects about the colonial elements of all of that relationship, which sounds interesting, but it was just a little bit too focused on the European side of things. There's also a lot of nature writing on those poems, which I like. So even though I did gel with the general writing of the poems, and they are kind of chunkier poems, I would say, like they are not very sparse. So I prefer that, and I enjoy the writing style. I think that the exploration of the themes was a little bit too Eurocentric. Then I read Zuidstraat by Denis Henriquez, and this is for Curacao, I think. Curacao or Aruba. So I read this in Dutch, and again it was another, like all of these books are like 100 pages, and this one was about Zuidstraat, is a street in Oranjestad, which is the capital of the island, and it just kind of jumps from one inhabitant of that street to another, and kind of at the beginning it felt kind of short stories, but then it connects all together, and it was a very everyday kind of story, so it was fine for me. It was just fine. And then the last one I read is The Ultimate Tragedy by Abdulai Mila, which is the first book from Guinea-Bissau to be translated into English, I believe. And yeah, this was a simple story with simple writing. It was interesting enough, and I did like the first part where we follow a girl that goes from her village to work in the world of the whites, as she calls it, because she was predicted to have like a dark future for herself, like she was going to be surrounded by a lot of tragedy, so she was an outcast in the village, so she decides she has nothing to lose and she will go to the world of the whites, and she struggles to understand the world of the whites, and it has a little bit of humor on when she makes comparison, and she struggles to understand how these people live and work and all of that. So I like that part. In the second part, she ends up marrying someone from her village again, and we go sort of back to her position in the community. Together with, we also have parts that are told from the perspective of the husband, and she also has a lover, and all of that kind of relationship side of things I didn't enjoy as much. But yeah, overall I think it was an okay book. Again, nothing too special apart from the fact that it's from Guinea-Bissau and there are not that many books translated to English from that side of the world. But yeah, those are all the books that I read this month. I know it's a lot, but there are a lot of audiobooks and there are a lot of very short books. So that's what happened this month. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you read any of these books, what you thought about them, and what you read in July. And until next video, bye!